Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So first, let's take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. Today, I have chosen 9 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 2 important columns for our mains examination and around 7 small articles for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these topics one by one as comprehensively as possible, along with few practice questions, so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiative, please let us know through your comments. Don't forget to press the like button and do subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, we have a couple of important announcements. To help you prepare for the upcoming prelims, we have launched a host of initiatives. One of them is the All India Prelims mock test. We have already conducted 2 full-length mock tests, which has been absolutely free of cost, and we are conducting the 3rd test on the 2nd of June. So this is an opportunity for you to attempt a full-length paper as you prepare for the upcoming prelims exam. So do register for the test by using the link provided in the video description, and you not only get to attempt the GS paper, but you'll also get to attempt the CSAT paper. Following the test, we will also have a discussion on the 3rd of June where we will analyze some of the important questions that had appeared in your GS mock test paper. You will also get an All India rank, and it is the best way to test your preparation. Plus, as part of Conquer Prelims, which is a free crash course which we have been conducting, today Mukesh sir will be taking up the next session for Environment Ecology at 6 p.m. on the Unacademy app, where we are discussing the most important static topics. And as part of the current affairs phase of the crash course, Asta ma'am will be taking up the last session, that is reports and indices, at 7:30 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. And also don't forget, Shyam sir is conducting an extended series under Conquer Prelims. So today, 31st of May, Shyam sir will be taking up the next session, the 10th session for Indian economy, where sir will be discussing both current affairs and static topics today at 12 p.m. on the Unacademy app. The easiest way to access all these classes would be to join our Telegram channel, where we share the links of these sessions. You just have to click on them to access the sessions live. So with this, let's get started with the discussion of the Hindu newspaper by looking at this important editorial from page number 8. This editorial is talking about the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or also called UAPA or UAPA. The topic is very important for Polity under GS paper 2. It's also very important for internal security under GS paper 3. So first, let's understand the context, and then we will dive deep into the topic and understand every detail that we need regarding UAPA. The context is that recently, Umar Khalid, a student activist who has been jailed over the last 3 to 4 years, has again been denied bail by a sessions court in Delhi. So Umar Khalid was essentially arrested in 2020 during the anti-CAA protests. I'm sure many of you would remember the controversy surrounding the Citizenship Amendment Act, and it led to countrywide protests, especially in Delhi. During these protests, student activist Umar Khalid had delivered few speeches asking for the people to mobilize and protest against this amendment which the government was planning to introduce into the citizenship law. So following this, the Delhi police arrested Umar Khalid on charges of inciting riots, on charges of unlawful activities, and was charged under the stringent law, the UAPA. And since then, Umar Khalid has remained in jail. He has applied for multiple bail petitions, and each and every time it has been rejected. And even without undergoing the trial or completing the trial, Umar Khalid has already spent more than 3 years in jail. Now, this brings up the question of UAPA and its possible misuse. The editorial is arguing that UAPA is such a stringent law, it has such draconian provisions, that often it gets misused to cripple dissent, to target criticism which is aimed against the government. But however, this is just one side of the story that the editorial is presenting. So today we'll look at both sides of the argument. We'll understand why a stringent law like UAPA is necessary. We'll talk about the primary purpose of UAPA along with its entire background and some of its key provisions. We'll also look at the criticism against UAPA and its amendments, especially from the perspective of fundamental rights and human rights. So this will be a comprehensive discussion so that if there is any question, be it under GS paper 2 or GS paper 3, you should be able to write a good answer for this question. Also, there are few points which can be relevant for prelims as well with regard to UAPA. So let's understand the topic in complete detail. The UAPA is India's primary law against terrorism. Today, the UAPA is primarily used to counter terrorism. So in India, we have a elite central counter-terrorist law enforcement agency, the National Investigation Agency, which is responsible for investigating and prosecuting terrorism cases in the country. So in any terrorist case in the nation, it is UAPA which is invoked. This is the primary anti-terror law of India. But if you look at its origin, if you look at the background to UAPA, it was brought out in 1967 when India didn't deal with the modern kind of state-sponsored terrorism that we are experiencing in the last few decades. Initially, when the law was introduced in 1967, it was meant for a slightly different purpose. So understanding the origin of the law, the background is very important, and we should also understand how this old, outdated law was repurposed into the primary anti-terrorism law of India. Today, it is the primary anti-terror law, but when it was enacted in 1967, its primary focus was not against terrorism. It only focused on so-called unlawful activities. Now, this is where you need some background and context. See, in the 1960s, it was a very challenging decade for India because we had fought two external wars, the 1961 war with China and the 1965 war with Pakistan. So when India was dealing with these external threats, there were few internal security problems. There were few secessionist movements, separatist movements which were gaining momentum, which were seeking separatism from India. So these internal security challenges, which came up parallelly to the external threats that India was dealing with, it posed a credible challenge to our sovereignty, our integrity and national integration. So following this, National Integration Council had established a committee in mid-1960s to suggest few changes and initiatives to build national integration and to protect unity, sovereignty and the integrity of the Indian state. Based on these recommendations, an ordinance was brought out by the President in 1966-67. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Ordinance was brought out to deal with any internal disturbances or unlawful activities which constitute an act of secession. Essentially, separatist activities internally in the nation which could threaten the unity of the nation, the integrity, sovereignty of the nation. So such acts, such internal acts, they were deemed as unlawful through this ordinance. It provided for very stringent provisions and it became very controversial in the parliament as well. There were fears that such an ordinance could be misused by the ruling parties in power at the center to target dissent and criticism. So it triggered a controversy in the parliament. So later, the ordinance was eventually replaced with a law. The parliament enacted the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and it came into force in 1967. So when it was brought out, its primary purpose was to tackle any kind of secessionist or separatist activities within the nation which could threaten India's internal security and unity and integration. So under UAPA, there was a provision through which an organization or a group of individuals who are involved in such secessionist or separatist activities, they could be charged, they could be arrested, they could be prosecuted. It also dealt with any act, any unlawful act. It could be a written act, or it could be through action, or it could be through certain signs and symbols. So any such activity which could lead to separatist tendencies within the nation, they were all branded as unlawful. Any such activity that is threatening the sovereignty of the nation was declared unlawful under the law, and it gave tremendous powers to the police, to the law enforcement authorities, to punish the perpetrators, the violators of this particular law. So over a period of time, the UAPA has seen a lot of changes. The law has evolved through various amendments. Because by 1980s, 1990s, India started to deal with modern day terrorism. Until then, our experience was largely with insurgency, especially in Northeast India. Also, the Naxal movement had kick-started in 1967. In fact, the peasant violence in Naxalbari, which triggered the Naxal movement in India, was also one of the motivation for the government to bring out the UAPA in 1967. Right? So until then, we had some experience with insurgencies, but not with outright terrorism. But from 1980s onwards, India started facing a major threat, especially from across the borders, when countries like Pakistan would sponsor terrorism against India. By late 70s and early 80s, we witnessed the rise of Khalistan movement. The Khalistan movement posed a credible security challenge for India in the 1980s. It would become our biggest internal security problem. Then by 1987, militancy and terrorism broke out in Jammu and Kashmir. In both the instances, there was a common involvement of Pakistan's state actors. Pakistan state agencies, such as the ISI, the Pakistani army, they would be involved in supporting such non-state actors in Punjab, in Jammu and Kashmir, and also in other parts of India and other parts of the world to wage a terrorism war against India. So as the threat of terrorism escalated, especially the Khalistan movement started posing a major threat to India, finally a law was introduced which would exclusively deal with terrorism. Any guesses? Which law is it? The notorious TADA, Terrorist and Disruptive Activities Prevention Act, brought out in 1985. This law was supposed to be India's primary law against terrorism. It operated for a decade until 1995, from 1985 to 1995. For one decade, TADA was in operation, but throughout its period of operation, TADA became extremely controversial. Because TADA contained some very stringent provisions. It gave tremendous power and authority to the police and law enforcement agencies, and quite often these powers were misused. Instead of going behind the actual perpetrators of an act of terrorism, several innocents would be charged and punished, because once charged under TADA, right, the police could have extended custody of the accused. Bail would almost become impossible. And it had even led to several cases of custodial torture, custodial killings. So large-scale allegations of human right violations, fundamental right violations came up, which made TADA one of the most controversial laws in India. But fortunately, the law came with a sunset clause. When it was enacted in 1984-85, it had an expiry date which had been set to it. It was supposed to expire in 1995. So given the controversy surrounding TADA, and also given that Khalistan movement declined by 1990s, India finally allowed TADA to lapse. The parliament allowed TADA to lapse as the sunset clause kicked in, and it was not renewed. So with the essential expiry of TADA, India was left without a law against terrorism. Then came another controversial law, equally controversial law against terrorism, which is the POTA, brought out in 2002 by the then Vajpayee government. Because throughout 1990s, India would witness many acts of terrorism, especially Pakistan-sponsored terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed. they would start carrying out attacks across Indian cities from Delhi to Mumbai. So to deal with state-sponsored terrorism, modern-day terrorism that India was facing, POTA was introduced in 2002, Prevention of Terrorism Act. POTA would also meet a similar fate. POTA was also very controversial. It was seen as very stringent. It would give enormous powers to the police, law enforcement agencies, and in several instances, it led to the misuse of the law, the abuse of the law. So eventually, POTA was repealed in 2004. In 2004, POTA was repealed by the next government. The Manmohan Singh government would repeal POTA, given the controversy surrounding it. And also, if you look at the conviction rate under TADA and POTA, under both these anti-terror laws, the conviction rate was extremely low. So it shows that either the cases were not genuine to begin with, right? Either the police had fabricated evidence and they had gotten hold of innocents because they couldn't actually catch the terrorists involved in an act of terrorism. So it was either the inefficiency of the police on one hand, or it was a deliberate attempt to pin the blame on someone just to show results, because there would be a lot of political media pressure following a terrorist attack. So either it was complete incompetency on part of the police and law enforcement, right? Or it was deliberate misuse. So that is what the low conviction rate indicates. Both under TADA and POTA, conviction rates were extremely low. So given that POTA was also repealed in 2004, India was left without a law against terrorism. It was in this context that the old UAPA was revived, it was brought back, it was reformed and turned into India's primary anti-terror law. The UAPA would undergo a series of amendments starting from 2004, then again in 2008 after the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. It was amended again in 2013 and more recently in 2019. Is that clear? So since POTA had been repealed, TADA had lapsed, India did not have a law against terrorism. So UAPA was amended in 2004 and some new provisions were added to turn UAPA into our primary anti-terror law. It was through this important amendment that the definition of terrorism was provided. Organizations, group of individuals involved in acts of terrorism were defined, and such organizations could be proscribed, meaning they could be banned by the Ministry of Home Affairs. The MHA, which is the nodal ministry for internal security, it was given the authority to proscribe or ban terrorist organizations. Is that clear? It also dealt with any kind of support, material support, financial support given to acts of terrorism. It dealt with membership of a terrorist group or possessing any material from weapons to explosives to radical literature which could aid extremist activities, terrorist activities. They were all defined through these amendments brought out in 2004. Even terrorist financing was brought under UAPA, including its connections with money laundering. So all these provisions were added to turn UAPA into India's primary law against terrorism. Following the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, it went through another set of amendments to make it even more stringent, to give even more powers to the police and law enforcement so that we could crack down on terrorism in the country. In 2013, UAPA was again amended because India had to meet the obligations of FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is an intergovernmental body that sets standards against money laundering and terrorist financing. So in 2013, UAPA was amended again to bring India's anti-terror law in line with FATF recommendations against terrorist financing. See, India has implemented the FATF standards through two legislations. We have adopted FATF standards against money laundering, the AML measures or anti-money laundering measures, under the PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act of 2002. The counter-terrorist financing measures, the CTF measures of FATF, they have been incorporated into this law, into UAPA. So through UAPA and PMLA, India has obliged with the anti-money laundering counter-terrorist financing measures as recommended by FATF. Understood? Now, if you look at some of the recent changes that have been done in 2008, 2013 and also in 2004, you will find that the law has become very stringent with each amendment. For example, if you look at the remand period, the police, after they detain the accused, right, they get to hold a remand of the accused so that they can continue with the investigation. Under general criminal laws, the remand period is up to 15 days, but under UAPA, right, if a suspect is arrested under UAPA on charges of terrorism, the remand period goes up to 30 days. All right. Next, judicial custody. During the course of investigation, after the accused has been arrested by the police, judicial custody can be extended up to even 180 days, up to 6 months. So these are certain provisions which tells us that UAPA is a very strict law, very stringent law. It favors the police and law enforcement, gives them more flexibility, more powers, more authority to deal with acts of terrorism. Understood? So organizations can be declared as terrorist organizations. There are provisions related to counter-terrorist financing, provisions related to any material support, weapon support, or any other logistical support which is extended to acts of terrorism. Right? Even those individuals can be charged and punished as well. It allows India to bring up the UNSC resolutions against terrorism and give effect to those UNSC resolutions in the country. UN Security Council, which also deals with counter-terrorism, adopts few resolutions against terrorism. So those resolutions of UNSC can be given effect in India through the UAPA. So all such provisions have been added. So through the 2013 amendment, we brought up our anti-money laundering and counter-terror financing measures up to FATF standards. Right? Both PMLA and UAPA were amended to bring them up to the Financial Action Task Force recommendations and standards. But the latest amendment done in 2019 is of critical importance. The recent amendment in 2019, along with UAPA, even NIA Act was amended, which expanded the powers of the NIA. And through UAPA amendment in 2019, further additional powers have been given to the law enforcement agencies. The biggest change done to UAPA in 2019 was that even individual terrorists now can be designated by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Prior to 2019, before this amendment, only organizations, a terrorist group like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, or let's say a Khalistani outfit like Babar Khalsa International, or the CPI Maoist, or NSCN-IM, a Northeast insurgent outfit, only such organizations could be proscribed as terrorist organizations before 2019 amendment. But with this new amendment, even individual terrorists can be designated by the MHA. So following this amendment, India has designated several terrorists like Hafiz Saeed, the leader of Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Lashkar-e-Toiba, Masood Azhar, the leader of Jaish-e-Mohammed, right? And some of the recent Khalistani elements who have been leading the revival of Khalistan movement against India from other countries. Such individuals can now be designated as terrorists because of this new amendment brought out in 2019. So clearly the law is very stringent. It provides tremendous powers to the police and law enforcement agencies such as the NIA to deal with acts of terrorism in the country. The government feels that such a law is necessary given the extent of threat India faces from terrorism, especially since there is state support to terrorism against India. But however, these very same provisions have raised a lot of concern because human rights activists and civil society activists and even legal experts, they've all expressed a lot of concern regarding the possible misuse of UAPA. In that regard, the UAPA has often been compared with the previous controversial laws such as TADA and POTA. UAPA also faces similar problems. For example, the stringent powers given to the police could easily be misused And in case of UAPA as well, the conviction rate is extremely low. Low conviction rate is often an indicator. It indicates that either the police are not able to gather the evidence, they are incompetent, they are not able to take the case to the final conclusion. They are not able to prove in a court of law that the accused was involved in the act of terrorism. Or it is deliberate right from the beginning. False charges were filed because they could not get hold of the real terrorist, but they went behind someone else. Or someone who was criticizing the government, maybe an activist, a student leader, a journalist, who was critical of the government, who was dissenting against the government or leading protests against the government. They were falsely accused of breeding terrorism against India and charged under UAPA. Right? So there are these possibilities, there are such instances which have come up. That is what leads to the criticism against the law. Now, the biggest concern with UAPA is the bail provision. It is said that once you're charged with UAPA provisions, basically under terrorism charges, getting bail becomes almost impossible. Why? That's because, according to UAPA, the judiciary, be it the lower court, high court or Supreme Court, whichever court is hearing the case, they will simply go by what the prosecution is telling them in the initial stage when a bail application is moved. Is that clear? When a bail application has been moved by the accused seeking bail, right, the courts will be guided simply by what the prosecution is telling them. That is what the law says. The judiciary will assume, right, even if there is some prima facie material available to show that the accused could be involved, right, that alone is enough. That prima facie suspicion is enough for courts to deny bail for months and years together, even before an actual trial can begin. Now, this is seen as a gross injustice. It is seen as a derailment of the principles of natural justice. Because generally, in a democratic setup, providing bail should be the norm, not the exception. But under UAPA, it becomes the other way around. In most cases, bail is denied. It falls on the accused to prove their innocence, even before the trial begins. So whatever the prosecution is telling the judiciary will accept that. Right? The police will say that this person was planning terrorist acts against India, but in reality, he might have just led some protests against the government. See, protesting and an act of terrorism, they are two completely different things. Let's say even a protest turns violent. It is still not the same as an act of terrorism. But there have been instances where the two have been equated. The right to protest, the right to peacefully organize, the right to assemble is a fundamental right, a constitutionally guaranteed fundamental right under Article 19. Let's assume a protest planned by few people or organization turns violent. But still it is not an act of terrorism. Right? Terrorism has a clear intent. It has an intent to strike fear. Terrorism has an intent to cause mass casualties. Terrorism has an intent to highlight a certain political message, an agenda that the terrorists are fighting for. So an act of terrorism is completely different from an act of protest, which might even turn violent. Let's say violence occurs during a protest. There are other laws available under IPC, CRPC to deal with them. But you can't invoke and press anti-terrorism charges under UAPA just because someone was planning a protest or criticizing the government or writing against the government. Recently, there have been many instances where such cases have been struck down by the court during the trial. Right? There have been several incidents, the Bhima Koregaon incident, the news click controversy. Right? In several instances, the courts eventually, right, they pass rulings in favor of the accused, which shows that the conviction rates are low because to begin with, either the police never had the evidence or it was completely falsified. So that is where the concern comes up, and there is a lot of international criticism as well against India with regard to UAPA. It's argued that it's in violation of some international conventions like Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights. It's argued that India's UAPA goes against some of these international conventions and covenants. So since bail becomes impossible and the police are favored by the judiciary, prosecution gets a favorable treatment, the burden of proving innocence falls on the accused. It becomes very challenging for the accused to get bail during the prosecution. Even before the actual trial can begin, right? During the bail application, right? During the bail phase itself, it's almost impossible for the accused to prove their innocence, and as a result, they would be jailed for months and years together. So that is the big concern that comes up with regard to the possible misuse of UAPA, right? So this is the other side of the story. But as I told you, UAPA is the primary anti-terror law of India that helps our law enforcement agencies to fight against terrorism. It is a controversial topic, a debatable topic. Do let me know what you think about this in the comment section. Do you think UAPA is being misused to curb fundamental rights under Article 19? Do you think the right to protest, right to assemble, which is a fundamental right, has it been unfairly equated with terrorist activity? As I said, even if a protest turns violent, it is still not an act of terrorism. Is that clear? But in certain instances, the government seems to think that leading a protest or even planning a protest against the government, which might turn violent, right? Of course, there are other provisions through which they can be dealt with. But UAPA charges are pressed, and essentially the accused remain in jail for months and years, because you know how slow the police and judicial system works. They will take months and years to reach the trial stage and to begin the final prosecution. But before that, the accused will spend months and years in jail, and that itself becomes a punishment. Is that clear? So let me know what you think about this. Do you think UAPA has been misused or not? Or do you think we need a law like UAPA which is stringent to fight terrorism? Because previously Tada Pota left behind a bitter experience, and we are seeing a similar trend with UAPA as well. So do let me know what you think. Now let me show you one PYQ. As part of the practice question that we discuss, there is a related question which UPSC had actually asked in 2019. Look at the question. Indian government has recently strengthened the anti-terrorism laws by amending the UAPA and as well as the NIA Act. All right, so that is the statement given to you. Recently, UAPA and NIA Act have been amended, right? The question was asked in 2019 mains. That's why the word recently was added. So you need to analyze the changes. What changes were introduced in the context of prevailing security environment, while discussing the scope and reasons for opposing the UAPA by human rights organizations. It's a well-structured question actually. So how do you answer such a question? Now you know all the basic facts, the analysis. It's about presenting your points in a structured manner. So start out your answer with an introduction by highlighting the threat of terrorism faced by India. A brief introduction about the nature and extent of terrorism and how it has affected India, and why we need efficient laws, why we need efficient counter-terrorist architecture to deal with the threat posed by terrorism. Right? So that will set the basis for your answer. Then in the body, you can talk about the role of NIA, the importance of UAPA, and the 2019 amendments that were carried out. So NIA Act was amended to expand the jurisdiction of NIA. All right? NIA was given foreign jurisdiction as well. Then NIA was given the mandate to investigate cases under other laws, related laws. Let's say if there are drug-related offenses, money laundering-related offenses, or offenses under the Atomic Energy Act, where there is a possible involvement of terrorists in carrying out a nuclear attack. So any such incidents, right, which are connected to terrorism, from drug trafficking to arms smuggling to incidents of any violations of Atomic Energy Act, all these instances, possible instances, were brought under NIA's jurisdiction. Right? So NIA's powers were expanded significantly. Then I told you what was the big change with UAPA. The big change was individuals could also be designated as terrorists. So by explaining the nature of threat against India, why we need institutions like NIA, laws like UAPA, right? You are explaining the importance of the institution and the legal framework in helping India to fight terrorism. Then come to the final part, which is the criticism against UAPA, the recent amendment. That's what the question is asking. discuss the scope and reasons for opposing UAPA by human rights organizations. Why did human rights organizations have a problem with the change? The concern was, if individuals can be designated as terrorists, then what if the government misuses the provision and targets activists, opposition leaders, journalists who are critical of the government? Anyone who's dissenting against the government, writing against the government, leading protests against the government. If they are labeled as terrorists under UAPA, that could lead to violation of human rights and fundamental rights. This was a concern, and it also triggered a controversy in the parliament. Opposition parties, they strongly opposed the amendment in 2019. Is that clear? So that is the reason why there was concern regarding the 2019 amendments. Understood? So just present that as part of the body and then conclude. Conclude with a way forward. You can say that India does need a strong legal framework and efficient counter-terror architecture, but it should never come at the cost of violation of human rights and fundamental rights. There needs to be a balance between national security and fundamental rights and human rights. This is very essential in a constitutional democracy. So suggest a way forward or a conclusion on these lines, and you can end your answer. Now let's look at the next article. In fact, this is an interview that Hindu is carrying out. It has brought in two experts. It has brought in a former Chief Election Commissioner, T.S. Krishnamurthy. It has also brought in a former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, P.D.T. Acharya. Both are very popular individuals as far as bureaucracy and governance in the country is concerned. So here they are debating about the MCC, the Model Code of Conduct, and the need to provide legal backing, to add more teeth to the MCC so that it can become more effective in dealing with violations during elections. So that is the debate being discussed here. So let's take a quick look at this topic. Now, what is MCC? We have been covering this topic ever since the general elections were announced. Even recently, I spoke about the general conduct expected by political parties and candidates. Now, today, let's take a much broader look at MCC. We'll understand its background, the purpose of MCC, which is notified and brought out by the Election Commission. We'll understand its relevance, its shortcomings, and should legal backing be provided to MCC? Should it have a statutory backing so that it can be enforced? So let's understand this quickly. So what is the Model Code of Conduct? The Model Code of Conduct is essentially a set of guidelines. It's a code of conduct that is brought out by the Election Commission, which is expected to be followed by political parties and their candidates when elections have been declared. Is that clear? The moment election dates are announced, once elections are notified, be it state elections or general elections, immediately the MCC kicks into effect. So from the time of announcement of elections till the results are announced, for that entire duration, the MCC will be in force. So during the conduct of elections, starting from nomination, public rallies, campaigns, speeches by the political leaders, the manifesto which is brought out by the parties, all the way till the conduct of elections on voting day, right? The restrictions near polling booths, how parties and candidates have to behave near polling booths and polling stations, the concept of a silence period, the various restrictions on the government, so government doesn't misuse the government machinery which can favor the ruling party, right? And final conduct on the day of results. So all of this is defined under a set of guidelines called the MCC, the Model Code of Conduct. When was it used for the first time? It was used for the first time in the year 1960 during the Kerala State Assembly elections. Since then, it became a regular practice. By 1962 general elections, it was being used regularly in all the elections being conducted in the country, and all parties had accepted the MCC in order to protect the sanctity of the electoral process. Because I hope you know that in a constitutional democracy, the very foundation of the democracy rests on the fact that free and fair elections can be conducted. So free and fair elections are the bedrock of a constitutional democracy. Every party, every candidate should have a level playing field. No one should have an unfair advantage. No one should resort to corrupt electoral practices to win votes. So this is ensured primarily through the MCC, the Model Code of Conduct. So from 1962 onwards, it has been regularly used during all the state and national elections, and it specifies certain codes of conduct expected by political parties and the candidates during the entire election period. That is from the day on which election schedule is notified till the day results are announced. For that entire duration, MCC guidelines are in force. Now let's understand what kind of restrictions, what kind of conduct rules are implemented under MCC. For example, there are few provisions regarding general conduct. How should parties and candidates behave in general? Let me give you some examples. For example, no candidate or no leader can seek votes in the name of caste, religion, etc. Basically, they can't engage in divisive politics. They can't seek votes in the name of religion. For seeking votes, for impressing their vote bank, they can't target another religion or another community or another caste. Such divisive campaigns and politics is completely discouraged, and it is treated as a corrupt electoral practice. Is that clear? Then, parties and candidates are supposed to refrain themselves from carrying out personal attacks against their opponents. Understood? They can't personally target their opponents. They can criticize their work, their professional experience or their previous record, right? But they can't target them personally. This is again provided under general conduct. Then with regard to the methods of campaign, for example, they can't violate the right of an individual to have a peaceful house life or home life. Parties and candidates can't come to your property, put up their banners without your permission, because that will disturb your right to peaceful life, right? So such restrictions are placed. These are the basic rules of general conduct expected by parties and candidates. They can't use places of worship, temple, mosque, etc., and any issues connected to them cannot be used to seek votes. So all such practices are labeled as corrupt electoral practices. It can even invoke charges if Election Commission proceeds with the case. Election Commission can even file an FIR under relevant provisions of IPC, then Representation of People Act. Those provisions can be invoked by the ECI to file cases as well in certain instances. Next, there are restrictions on the party in power. Ruling parties obviously will have an advantage. They can use the public money to launch populist schemes to impress the voters and to get the votes. So that affects the level playing field, right? Opposition parties need a level playing field to compete with the ruling party, because ruling parties will also have the entire government machinery under them. What if they misuse the government officials to favor the ruling party? Correct? Or what if they use the government's PR machinery, advertisement machinery, to campaign for the ruling party, to project the leaders of the ruling party and seek votes through government machinery and government expenses, right? So this cannot be allowed. So that is the reason why there is a moratorium on the launch of any new schemes, new projects. Once MCC kicks into effect, political parties which are in power and their leaders, they come under a lot of restrictions. They can't launch new initiatives, new schemes, and if there is any urgent initiative in national interest, they have to get special permission from the Election Commission of India. Is that clear? So such restrictions are placed on the ruling parties to ensure that there is a level playing field for all the parties and candidates. So apart from this, you also have the silence period, which is implemented for 48 hours duration before the election begins, where all campaign rallies have to come to an end. It also specifies certain guidelines regarding political rallies, speeches and campaigns, etc. Right? So all such guidelines are part of the MCC. Now, the reason why MCC is being debated is because there are a lot of allegations against Election Commission that Election Commission has not been unbiased. It has not been able to act against certain popular leaders, against several violations which were committed recently during the 2024 general elections. Several parties and candidates have blatantly violated the MCC guidelines. They have delivered divisive speeches. They have delivered speeches bordering on hate speech. They have invoked caste, religion, whatnot to seek votes. Right? They have done it quite openly, publicly. You see that there have been large-scale violations by different parties, different leaders. It's not about who has done this. The question here is Election Commission has been found lacking in its action against these violations. The Election Commission has not taken sufficient action apart from issuing some notices. It hasn't done much, and it essentially undermines the MCC, it undermines the conduct of free and fair elections. So that is why the Hindu is asking these experts, should MCC be provided statutory backing? Right now, MCC is not very effective because one reason is that it has no legal backing. It can't be enforced. MCC by itself has no enforcement. It can't be enforced by the Election Commission, right? If it has to be enforced, the ECI has to bring in other provisions from, let's say, RPA, Representation of People Act, or from IPC. Those charges have to be brought up and an FIR has to be filed if parties and candidates are violating and ignoring the notices of Election Commission. Usually, when violations are reported, right, ECI will issue a notice. That is the first step, either on its own or based on the complaint filed by the opposition parties and candidates. The ECI will issue a notice to the candidate and the party who have violated the MCC guidelines. So they'll have to reply back. Either they have to apologize and say that we'll not repeat it, or they have to explain why they did what they did. Based on that, ECI can consider further action. For example, ECI does have the power to, let's say, bar a candidate from campaigning for a few days, or permanently bar the candidate during that entire election season and prevent the candidate from delivering speeches and attending rallies. Or there could be a temporary disqualification, right, from contesting elections for certain candidates. So such powers do exist with Election Commission because Article 324 provides the ECI with full superintendence over the electoral process. That's why it's often said that Article 324 accords tremendous powers to the ECI. The Election Commission has a repository of powers under Article 324. But problem is, it's often found lacking on ECI's part. ECI doesn't go to that extent where it leverages the constitutional authority granted to it when it comes to the violations of MCC. So that is why there is a debate that should legal backing be provided. Now, until now we understood that MCC is being blatantly violated, ECI hasn't done enough. So you might feel that yes, statutory backing should be provided to make MCC effective. Correct? That's one line of thinking. But let's look at the counter argument. The experts actually provide a very solid argument. Providing statutory backing to MCC could also become dangerous. Let's understand why. If, let's say, legal backing is provided to MCC and it becomes legally enforceable, then multiple election-related cases will reach the doorstep of our courts. ECI will file cases, political candidates will file counter petitions. So unless and until the cases are decided by our courts, the electoral process could get disrupted. It could disrupt the electoral process, which could be dangerous in a constitutional democracy. Right? In such a large country, it's very critical to hold the elections without interruption, ensure that it's completed as quickly as possible, results are announced, and ensure that there is a peaceful transfer of power. This is the hallmark of an electoral democracy. But if legal backing is provided and if multiple cases are being filed and if all the cases are reaching the doorsteps of the courts, there could be inordinate delays in deciding the election results, in forming the next government. So this could lead to political instability. It could disrupt and derail the electoral process itself. So that is why the experts, they are against providing legal backing to MCC. They are saying that statutory backing will not solve the problem, it will actually lead to a new problem. So instead, they are calling upon Election Commission to use its extraordinary powers under Article 324 to penalize the violators. The argument they are making is that the ECI need not wait for a law to be passed to give more authority to the MCC. ECI already has a repository of powers under Article 324, which it can invoke. It's an independent, autonomous organization, a constitutional body. So as I said, apart from filing cases under relevant provisions of IPC and RPA, right, the ECI has many other options, right? Apart from taking the judicial route, there are many other options which can act as a disincentive for parties and candidates, which might discourage them from resorting to such practices. So ECI can penalize them. It can impose a monetary penalty, for example, a very hefty monetary fine. So that is a strong deterrent. Or disqualify these candidates and leaders for a short period of time. Maybe for the entire election season, they should not come out for campaigns. They should be prohibited from public rallies. So different grades of offences can be listed out by the ECI, and for each violation there can be incremental penalties and punishments which can act as an effective deterrent. So that is the argument of the experts. They say that providing legal tooth or bringing out a law that gives statutory backing to MCC might actually create more problems by disrupting the electoral process. So that is what we understand from this interview, and based on this I have given you a mains question. Model Code of Conduct of Election Commission plays a key role in ensuring the conduct of free and fair elections, but it has been quite ineffective in preventing or punishing violations as it has no legal backing. Analyze. So the directive given here is analyze, which means you'll have to look at this from all possible angles. So first, you can start your answer by talking about the MCC and the role of MCC in the introduction. Don't waste your word limit and your time by writing unnecessary points. You don't have to give the background of MCC. You don't have to mention it was introduced in 1960 in Kerala. Those facts were just for your knowledge, maybe for a prelims question. You don't have to mention that in mains. Always hit the nail on its head. Don't beat around the bush. Directly talk about MCC, its importance in elections, how it can help in conducting free and fair elections, right? So once you discuss that, in the body you can discuss the brief provisions I was mentioning, like general conduct, restrictions on party in power. Give a couple of examples and show how it is very important in the conduct of free and fair elections. Next, talk about its inefficiency. Discuss some of the cases, the incidents that have come up. You need not name any party or leader, right? Never show any political bias or political affiliation in your answer. Don't take the name of any party or any leader. Just refer to some recent incidents where votes have been sought in the name of religion, where places of worship have been used for seeking votes. Such violations can be easily mentioned without naming any individual or any party. And point out how Election Commission has not taken sufficient action. So that shows that there is something lacking with the ECI, right? It's lacking the courage to go after popular leaders and big leaders and candidates. Because let's say if you look at legendary election commissioners like T.N. Seshan, during those days, parties and candidates, they would fear the Election Commission. But things have changed. Of course, you can't have Election Commission to be super powerful as well. But at the same time, you need at least ECI to be independent, to be autonomous, and to ensure that existing guidelines are strictly enforced, irrespective of who's the violator. Be it the Prime Minister, be it the opposition leader, shouldn't matter. But there are instances where ECI has been found lacking. There is criticism, you can say that. There are allegations, there are points of criticism against ECI, which raises questions about its integrity, about its unbiased decision making, right? And then point out why a legal backing might be necessary. Some argue that legal backing would make it more effective. But then you can discuss the drawbacks of providing legal backing. You can say that it will only increase the number of cases in the courts and it will disrupt the electoral process, right? It could interfere with the transfer of power. So there are serious consequences if legal backing is provided. So then come to your conclusion, come to the way forward. You can suggest that instead of legal backing, ECI can invoke the repository of powers it already has under Article 324. It needs to set penalties, punishments and deterrents so that the violators are penalized, punished. From monetary penalty, that is fines, to disqualification, right? And if required, charges under IPC and RPA. All these options are available. The ECI has to simply use them. So that could be a way forward, and you would have analyzed the entire topic. So now we'll head to the prelim section and take a quick look at the small articles. Let's start with article number 1 on the first page. So this article refers to the onset of monsoons. So this is a great relief, especially for those parts of India which are struggling with heat wave conditions. Of course, it will take few more days and weeks until the whole country gets relief from the devastating heat waves. But at least the monsoon has arrived on time. In fact, it has arrived a day earlier. And there is something interesting with the onset of monsoon this year. I'm sure you would have studied in geography, especially in your NCRTs, that southwest monsoon, right? It breaks into two branches. You have the Arabian Sea branch and you have the Bay of Bengal branch. Correct? The southwest monsoon, which makes onset by end of May or early June, it splits into two different branches. And the Arabian Sea branch will strike Kerala. The Bay of Bengal branch will make onset at Andaman Nicobar and also in northeast India. Generally the trend is that it is the Bay of Bengal branch which will first make an onset at Andaman Nicobar, then Arabian Sea branch will make an onset in Kerala, and then Bay of Bengal branch will proceed towards northeast India. That is the general pattern and trend. Finally, after few weeks, by mid to end June, the two branches will converge in central India, bringing sufficient rainfall to most parts of the country. Correct? That is the usual pattern and trend. But sometimes there is a rare occurrence where both the branches arrive at the same time. And that is what we have witnessed. Not just at Andaman, the Bay of Bengal branch has arrived in the northeast. It has made an onset in the northeast on the same day when the Arabian Sea branch made the onset in Kerala. Now, this is not the first time it's happening. There have been previous occurrences as well, but it is a rare occurrence. Now, why am I stressing on this point? UPSC might ask a question in prelims. A statement might be given saying that the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal branch can never arrive on the same date. It's incorrect. It can arrive on the same date. Usual pattern is Bay of Bengal branch will first arrive in Andaman Nicobar, then Arabian Sea branch will arrive in Kerala, and then Bay of Bengal branch proceeds to northeast India, right? But there can be a change in some years where the onset will happen on the same day from Kerala to even northeast India. So we are witnessing a simultaneous onset of both the branches in Kerala and northeast India. So that is the important point we take away from this article. Next, on the same page, we have an important development with regard to space technology and 3D printing. The article is referring to a private space company based out of Chennai, which has launched a 3D printed rocket. This rocket engine, a semi-cryogenic rocket engine, it has been fully brought out and developed and manufactured through 3D printing. This is the world's first fully functional rocket engine which has been 3D printed. All right, it's been developed by a space startup called Agniban. And this launch vehicle is called Sorted, Agniban Sorted. Sorted stands for Suborbital Technology Demonstrator. So it's a demonstrator mission. It's a test mission to display and test the technology. And for the first time, it has been launched by our private space pad, which is called Dhanush. You all know about ISRO's spaceport in Sriharikota, correct? But India now has a private spaceport as well, a very modest launch facility which has been set up by the same company. Agniban has established the first private launch pad called Dhanush in Sriharikota. Right? This is distinct from the spaceport facilities of ISRO. It's next to it, ISRO has provided support, but this is the first private launch pad in India. So from the Dhanush private launch pad, the 3D printed rocket engine has been launched and tested. That's what we learned from this article. Next, we have an article referring to the Sariska Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan. There is a positive news. According to this article, 5 new tiger cubs have been spotted in Sariska and the tiger population has jumped to 40. Now, this is extremely important and I'll tell you why. Just around 2 decades ago, in 2005, Sariska had lost all its tigers. Its tiger population had fallen to 0. In fact, this was one of the reasons which triggered the revival of Project Tiger under the then Manmohan Singh government. It was an alarming revelation that tigers had been driven out entirely in Sariska back in 2005. So following that, Project Tiger was completely revived because tiger census report showed alarmingly low numbers in the country with 0 tigers being reported in Sariska. So tiger rehabilitation was also introduced from nearby habitats like Ranthambore and Savai Madhopur. From these protected areas, few new tigers were introduced, and with improved protection and conservation efforts, the tiger population today has jumped to 40 healthy tigers in the Sariska Tiger Reserve. So that is why it's very important. So please note, it's in Rajasthan in the Alwar district and it's part of the Aravali range. It's part of the Northern Aravali Leopard and Wildlife Corridor. Next, article number 6. It's related to environment and ecology. In Kerala, a new project has been launched by the Kerala Forest Research Institute to study the frog species during the monsoon season in the Western Ghats. It's called Monsoon Croaks project. So UPSC might ask you a question. Monsoon Croaks BioBlitz 2024. That is the official name of this project. Monsoon Croaks. Croak is reference to a frog because frogs croak. Right? BioBlitz is essentially a survey, a field level survey conducted to count the number of species present. So Monsoon Croaks BioBlitz 2024, it's a survey of the frog population in the Western Ghats in Kerala during the monsoon season. All right? Because see, frogs they are an important indicator of the health of an ecosystem. If pollution is increasing, if climate change, global warming is having an impact, right, there will be an impact on the frog population. So in an ecosystem, if frogs decline, it's a good indicator that the entire ecosystem is under threat. And vice versa. If you find a healthy, diverse frog population and species present in a habitat, it's a good indicator that the ecosystem is doing very well. So according to IUCN, right, 41% of the world's frog species are endangered. They are facing a lot of threats and challenges due to habitat destruction, climate change, global warming, pollution, etc. So in this context, it's very important to estimate the different species of frogs, especially during monsoon season, because that is when you see a big explosion in their population. So this BioBlitz, called Monsoon Croaks BioBlitz, is being conducted in Kerala, and the data collected, it will be shared with the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. Please write this down. This is another important point. The data will be shared with Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF. So what is GBIF? GBIF is an international database. It's a collective project of all the countries around the world. The governments have sponsored this initiative called GBIF. It is located in Copenhagen in Denmark. So it's a database of all the important species and biodiversity resources, and the data is contributed by the member countries. All right, so it's an important environment-related initiative. It's funded by the world's governments, and it's basically a database of all the species data, population data, and any other biodiversity related data. So data collected through census, through such surveys, BioBlitz exercises, this is shared from each country with GBIF, and the data is stored here in Copenhagen. This is extremely useful for conservationists, for policy makers, right, to come out with better efficient programs for biodiversity conservation. Such data will be very, very crucial. So this is an international data sharing platform and network where the data is accessible to all the member countries as well. Next, on page 12, we actually have a very important article. Indian UN Peacekeeper, Major Radhika Sen, has been awarded by the United Nations. You can see Radhika Sen over here in the image from the Indian Army. She is seated right next to our permanent representative to the UN, Ruchira Kamboj, who is a top IFS officer. So yesterday there was a ceremony at the United Nations in New York where the Indian Army officer Radhika Sen, Major Radhika Sen, was awarded the UN Award on Gender Advocacy, which is awarded to UN peacekeepers. So Major Radhika Sen was deployed as part of a UN peacekeeping unit in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. DRC in Africa is going through a civil war, and India is one of the big contributor of troops for the UN peacekeeping mission in DRC. Right? India has always been a big troop contributing country. India has always been one of the top troop contributing countries to UN peacekeeping forces. We have contributed more than 2 lakh personnel till date. More than 170 Indian personnel have lost their lives in UN peacekeeping missions. So India has done an incredible contribution to UN peacekeeping, right? So we have even deployed entire women contingents, especially in some of the conflict zones in Africa. So Major Radhika Sen was leading an Indian troop contingent, and for her phenomenal leadership and for her phenomenal effort and courage and contribution in DRC in leading an entire contingent, she has been awarded the UN Award on Gender Advocacy for her contribution to UN peacekeeping. So please remember this, there might be a question, if not a factual question on Radhika Sen, at least a question on India's efforts towards UN peacekeeping operations. Next, on page 16, under the international section, we have a reference to the Catalan independence movement, which is seen in Spain. The Catalan movement or the Catalonian movement, it's a pro-independence separatist movement, a secessionist movement seen in Spain. You might think Spain is a developed European country. How can it witness separatism, right? But there is a native separatist movement in Catalonia. So this topic is in the news. The Spanish Parliament has approved a bill, an amnesty bill, which is very controversial. It is giving amnesty to the Catalan separatists who have been fighting for Catalonia's independence from Spain. All right. So where is Catalonia located? Here you can see the Iberian Peninsula on which Portugal and Spain are situated. You can see Atlantic Ocean over here, the Mediterranean Sea over here. So in the northeast part of Spain, bordering France and Andorra, this is where Catalonia is located. Since many decades, the Catalan people, they have had a separate demand. They want to break away from Spain to form their own country. In 2017, they even held a referendum. There has been some violence as well. There have been few Catalan armed insurgent groups who have tried to instigate violence. So this is an internal security problem Spain has been dealing with for many years. And now a bill has been brought out to give amnesty to some of the separatist leaders of the Catalan independence movement. So UPSC will not go into the details. You should just know the Catalan movement or Catalonia is related to which country, right? Just for a map-based question. Next, on the same page, we have another important article, a very important development. The article is referring to a canal project in Cambodia, which is being funded and built by China. China and Cambodia are very good friends. They have very good relations. Recently, for example, China has got access to the Ream naval base in Cambodia, and China is setting this up as a military base, a foreign military base of the PLA Navy. So China, Cambodia have very good political, diplomatic and military relations and economic relations. So in Cambodia, China is building a strategic canal called the Funan Techo Canal. Funan Techo Canal. This canal connects the capital of Cambodia, which is Phnom Penh. It connects the capital directly with the sea, that is with South China Sea and Gulf of Thailand. Because see, Cambodia has been very dependent on Vietnam for connectivity with the sea, especially for transporting goods from the capital, Phnom Penh. It has been dependent on Vietnam, and through Vietnam it has been shipping its products and importing products from South China Sea. Now China is helping Cambodia to reduce its dependency on Vietnam. As you know, China and Vietnam are hostile to each other. They are rivals. They have standing maritime and land boundary disputes. So China is helping Cambodia build this strategic canal which runs through the river over here in the Mekong Basin. It will connect the capital city directly with the sea over here, thus improving sea access for Cambodia. So it will reduce Cambodia's dependency on Vietnam. So that is why the project is important, the Funan Techo Canal project, funded by China, being constructed by China in Cambodia. So on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you have understood all the topics that we have discussed. If you like the session, do let me know in the comments, and do express your support through your likes, share the video with other students, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.